Hello and welcome to the Museum of Latin American Arts 2021 Afro-Latinx Festival. My name is Elizabeth Aguilar, and on behalf of the rest of the staff at MOLA, I would like to thank you for joining us today as we learn more about the diversity of Afro-Latinx experiences and dive into the history of the African legacy throughout Latin America. Before we begin, I would like to thank the event sponsor that made this 10-day event possible and accessible. Please enjoy this short message from our presenting sponsor, the Port of Long Beach.
Hola, I'm Mario Cordero. Welcome to the Museum of Latin American Arts 2021 Afro-Latinx Festival. We are pleased to sponsor this event that highlights the rich diversity in our community. Throughout our history, the Port of Long Beach has long been a supporter of education, the arts, and community efforts that amplify and deepen the understanding of our cultural tapestry and impact. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy this exploration of the African influence in Latin America and Latinx culture. Felicidades, el Museo de Latin American Art. Muchas gracias por esta oportunidad.
MOLA receives additional support from the Robert Gumbacher Foundation, the City of Long Beach, and the Arts Council of Long Beach. We are excited to present the speakers for today's event, Ariana and Alán, the Kindred Tour. Ariana Brown is a queer Black Mexican-American poet from San Antonio, Texas. She is the author of Sana Sana, a poetry chapbook with the Game Over Books, and a 2014 National Collegiate Poetry Slam champion. Ariana's work investigates queer Black personhood in Mexican-American spaces, queer Black futures, loneliness, and healing. She has been writing, performing, and teaching poetry for 10 years. Alán Pelaez Lopez is an Afro-Zapotec artist from Oaxaca, Mexico. They are the author of Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien, The Operating System 2020, and To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement, Nomadic Press 2020. Much of their writing honors the messiness of grief, love, social movements, and reconciliation. They live in Oakland, California, and have been organizing with undocumented LGBTQIA and migrants for 10 years. We hope that you enjoy the program.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining Ariana and I. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing a poetry reading followed by a Q&A. I'll be reading poems first, and then Ariana will follow. And afterwards, the two of us will convene in dialogue with all of you. So as said before, my name is Alán, and although I have 2 books out, I'm going to be reading, I'm going to start with some poems I wrote this summer. Through workshops that Ariana and I co-facilitated. And the first poem that I want to read is titled Border Story, and it is using words by J.R. Mahan. So here it goes. I want to believe that the migration was and is a lie. I remember searching for a bridge connecting 5-year-old me to 500 years of lies. I don't want to tell a lie, so I hold and scream it inside the walls of my mouth. Legend goes that the most beautiful lies are the ones that allow us to survive, to insist breath on air, fire on land, love on water. I think my mother is a legend, a nuanced one whom not all should have the privilege of witnessing. I, too, am a legend. Somewhere in there is a lesson of a child who learned to lie to cross. Somewhere in there is a lesson about illegality and fugitivity, being and unbeing, remembering and forgetting. Somewhere in there is a lesson, and right now, I don't want it. Right now, I want the lie. I want a cup of coffee and a donut, a lover and an ex, a friend and a shower, a photo and a blanket, and a country that won't kill me. I don't want to tell a lie, so I'll tell you one truth. I am tired and it hurts. So I grew up undocumented in the US. I crossed the US-Mexico border at 5 years old. And growing up undocumented, Black, Indigenous, and queer was kind of trippy because it's always like, oh my gosh, another thing, you know, like you cross the border and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gay. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm still undocumented. And then when you experience anti-Blackness in the US, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm undocumented and I'm gay and I'm experiencing anti-Blackness. I'm like, can a little queer just get a break? And the only reason why I think I've been able to really move through the world is because of the women around me. And this poem is for Candy, Noemi, and my mother. And it's titled A Home Remembered. I know that I am my mother's child. Before moving across the country, I burned her CD collection and saved it on my external hard drive. On days where I too forget how to hold myself, forget that I exist in a body, I pull out the hard drive. I sit in my own stillness and I listen. Each song brings me back to our apartment building in East Boston, Massachusetts. I am 7, recently illegalized by the law. Ama, Noemi, and Gandhi sit in the living room. Noemi opens a new pack of cigarettes. I am asked to open the windows, and they playfully fight to select the music. It'll be a vallenato. It always is. Our apartment will become South America, will become the Caribbean, will become the Atlantic coast, will become the Pacific coast, will become an island, will become a country. It'll be a vallenato, and for the duration of the song, none of us will be displaced. Each of us will belong to the drum, to the accordion, to the flute, and to our feet. In a matter of seconds, we become air. Ama laughs with tears in her eyes as she moves her hips and pretends to dance with someone who no one ever knows. Gandhi grabs my hands and teaches me how to move like her people, tells me that in Colombia, the people move as if they have never experienced joy and are experiencing joy for the first time every single time they dance. She tells me that one day all of us will have papers and she will take us to her country. These are the women who taught me how to insist on joy. There is no one who can teach you joy like them. With this hard drive, with this music, I resurrect joy in my body. I bring an ocean to my room, a country to my room, a home to my room, joy to my room. That was A Home Remembered. And you know, I didn't always think about joy. One of the earliest memories I have of my life in the US is me actually surveilling my mother's joy and her intimacy. I remember asking all of my mother's friends if they had papers or not. And every time one of her friends would tell me that they had papers, I would tell my mom, why can't you just date them? Why can't you marry them? And it wasn't until I was probably in high school that I realized that even though I did not know the word surveillance or policing, I had internalized that because being undocumented means you internalizing everything that you hear in the media, at school, in passing about undocumented people, right? So I would surveil my mother's love. And I want to take us into some poems about love and intimacy and what it might mean to betray the narrative that the US has of the undocumented to center love. And this is actually written inside an immigration form. My first book, Intergalactic Travels, I have a lot of poems that are written inside immigration forms. And here is one. I met a boy when I was 19. He had a scar below his left nipple. When I asked him how he got it, he covered his digits and said, when I crossed. That's when I told him I loved him. Loved him for living, loved him for sharing, loved him for trusting, loved him for reminding me we are human, loved him for honesty, loved him for stories, loved him for poetry. I met a boy when I was 19. He had spent 2 years and 17 days in a detention center. I swore to set the border on fire. I met a boy when I was 19 and we did immoral things. We are criminals, sir. Take me, 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 me. One of the things that people around me taught me before migrating to the US was to tell, if I got caught, to tell them a different name, to tell them that I was from a different place in Mexico. And my whole crossing, I remember it took months for me to be trained to cross a border. But one of the things that I wasn't taught was how to offer and accept care after you have crossed. So what happens once you reach your destination? How do you unlearn everything that you learned prior to the crossing? And I really wish that I had a different understanding of love and care when I was younger. And this next poem is really small. It's in the shape of lips, but it's my process of approaching love. Illegal is to poet when the government demands and needs your silence. And illegal is to have survived again and again and still be running. And illegal is to find pleasure on the lips of another alien and for the first time call that living. Now I want to take us to a poem that I actually wrote on my cell phone, on the note section on my phone. It's titled 18 Notes on Love. 18 Notes on Love. 1, I walk behind him, study his pace, check if his arms swing to the beat of his step, and scurry to catch up. I remind myself that yes, our love may not be safe, but Black and Indigenous liberation requires risk. 2, we will walk next to each other, close. On the perfect day, the tops of our hands will meet each other's warmth, and a new world will begin to build. 3, and we will pretend not to notice. There is a lot of pretending not to here. 4, we will walk and laugh. 5, at bars, we pretend there is no trauma. 6, but sometimes we kiss, a peck most likely, or a longer kiss, but only when we can assure that the traffic lights will be our only witnesses. 7, we're gonna get hate crimed, one will joke, as queers of color usually do. 8, and we will sin, and we will continue to do so often. 9, hands will slip underneath t-shirt, flesh will meet, devour, and offer flesh. 10, one of us will open our eyes as we kiss, and that world that started to form a while back will beget new forms of care. 11, we will stand outside, breathing hard or hardly breathing as we examine each centimeter of pupil. 12. The optometrist says that the pupil determines how much light will enter the eye. And this moonlight is mischievous. Why does she insist in having us enter into one another's eyes? 13. After a thorough eye exam, his right hand will delicately move my locks away from my glasses and ask, 14, is it okay if we hold hands all the way tonight? 15, we will hold on for dear life. 16, heteros will brand us as deca radical, but in a forever era of anti-Blackness, femicides, and other settler violences, let's be precise and call it living the only way we've known how. 17, our future is not guaranteed here. It never was. 18, and for this reason, we create abundance where we thought there was none. Okay, and I really want to get into a conversation. So this is the last piece I'm going to read, and I'm really excited because this piece is going to have its debut in about a month. It's going to be on vinyl text in a huge museum gallery. So it's titled Future Story, and it's going to be in Spanish and in English. I'll read the English story. One day, borders will be a word that we study, a word so fascinating that future generations will try to understand. And thankfully, there will be no grammar for comprehension. Nothing will be forgotten, but borders will be unimaginable because in the future, the lack of care and the lack of commitment to each other that was required to oppress will be something no one has experienced. In the future, we will bring our memory. There will be many creation stories to how we got to where we are. The creation stories will be difficult to witness. We will sob from the pain of betrayal, poor care, bad love, state-sanctioned executions, missing and disappeared relatives, endangered languages, extinct species, and the disaster of bearing witness to it all. But we will also shake with joy when we describe what it felt like when settlers realized that they were the demise of relationality, when settlers begged Indigenous peoples to protect the land, and when Indigenous peoples made them sign papers, the same ones they've always been obsessed with, saying that they gave up their citizenship to the country, they gave up all their laws, and that they gave up the land they had accumulated and mistreated. We will release tension when the storytellers get to the part where the elders and toddlers made offerings so grand to the ocean, volcanoes, and mountains, and dried waterscapes that words they had never heard before started coming to them in dreams. At first, we were terrified, but when they listened closer, they realized they were whispers and songs, quiet, quiet tunes with instructions of how to offer and accept love. The love that the whispers and songs were denied, but once experienced. None of these stories will be easy to tell. Our bodies will only bear to tell and listen to them once every few years, because in those moments, we will meet the past at its barest state. But still, we will insist on the stories. Thank you. And now I want to give it up to Ariana Brown, who is an incredible poet, friend, partner in crime. Ariana Brown, take it up.
Thank you, Alán. Oh, wow. I'm so I feel like I'm so present in witnessing your poems. Thank you for that. Wow. Every time I hear Alán's work, I think about the commitment to the fullness of life. And that's so overwhelming, I think, to feel as you're reading, Alán. And I feel like part of that understanding begins in childhood, right? A lot of the poems go back to childhood. So I wanted to start with a poem about childhood also, and then move into some newer poems that I'll be sharing. So this first poem is called Invocation. You were once teenage purveyor of the white girl gospel, zealous pupil of the hot comb, of oily neck and folded ear. But before that, you were young. You were asked questions about your dead father and your hair, your first conversation with God. Faithless. Child of the singing forehead, child of the frustrated wrist. Your mother yelled while you fell asleep on your aunt's pillows, and now the whole couch smells of you. Child of amorous palming, everyone can tell where you've been. Even bus windows remember your name. Child of the curl that stole the wind's fury. How could everything about you not be bursting? Child of the busted chongo, child of the broken brush, splitting anything weak in half while still blushing for a gentle hand. You are your own lesson in commitment. Child of royalty, of the silk scarf before bed, defender from the cotton resurrected each night to steal you back, every pillowcase a looming field of ghosts. Child of the rained out funeral, child of grocery bag protection. At age 12, washing your own hair is your first act of humility, listening to your blackness, your first mode of resistance. Child of the eloquent scalp, which negotiations did you lose today? How many times did you lift your hands in ceremony to unravel and partition? Tell us how you learned to fix, fluff, and plait, to wind and plow. How you were late for class and work doing so. How you skipped breakfast. How you tended. How you greeted a new ancestor in the mirror and let their moans trickle and slither down the length of you. How each strand circles back to its own beginning. Child of inheritance, rejecting gravity and its theorem. The eternal resilience. When the weather catches you unprepared, you curse each raindrop, undoing your labor with its disrespectful weight. But unlike anything else in the world, when smothered in water, submerged in a substance thick enough to kill you, nearly drowned and gasping, you rise, and refusing invisibility, grow to the size all benevolent gods are. I wrote that poem in 2014, and it still feels just as important then as it does now. I want to move into some poems that are from a manuscript that I've been working on that kind of explores being a Black person in mostly Mexican American spaces that are not Black spaces. And so this poem is actually the first poem that shows up in the manuscript. It's called At the End of the Borderlands. I have some poems in here with the word Borderlands in the title because I want to speak back to the legacy of Borderlands in Mexican American studies. So this is At the End of the Borderlands. We need new origins. Countries are killing everyone I love. From my cousin's lips, a wish for my safety. For my curandera's hands, rituals for healing. I simmered rosemary and drank its tea. Grew my hair thick as a plague. spoke poems till my throat blistered and waned and still could not curse colonizers enough to undo their work. No one I know has enough money to live, yet asks if I've eaten. Before day's end, we feed each other our blackness, grow full from offering, our many tongues, studies, compassion, our wilderness and names. We run the length of country, reddening our feet, come to our own ends to face ourselves. What will we leave in our wake? Who we are now is our responsibility, our empty pockets, our humility or shame. Culture alone will not save us. Who are you without your country? What would you give? Would you fight for those you don't love, to whom you are indebted? I'm going to read another poem in the Borderlands suite. This poem is called Borderlands Suite Names. Brown is my name. Brown was my father's name, and his before his, and his before his, and his before his. Before Brown was my name and my father's name, it was a white man's name. Brown is his name, not yours. Brown is the name of a slave owner. Brown is a color. Brown is the color of some of my family, not all. Brown is my name, not yours. Brown is the color I am no matter the season. I am brown, but I am not dark-skinned. Black is also my color. Black is also my allegiance. I am black, but I am not dark-skinned. Brown does not mean dark-skinned. Black power is my allegiance. Black is not my name, but it is my condition. Black people exist in every country. Black people exist in every country because of slavery, because of migration. Being Black is different than being brown. Brown does not mean indigenous. Mexican does not mean brown. I am proud to be Black. Black power inspired the brown berets who were not all brown. Black power is fundamental. Mexican is not a race, so there is no such thing as brown power. What raza? Mestizaje means Mexico without Black people. Mexican is different from Mexican American. What do you mean? I am being perfectly clear. There's a series of poems in the manuscript about a study abroad trip that I took to Mexico City in 2016 with my university. And this poem is called Field Notes. I was just taking notes on like how people responded to me as the only Black person in my group, moving through different popular spaces in Mexico City. So this poem, Field Notes, there are like little couplets on the left and right that talk about different experiences that I had in Mexico City. And then the text in the center is taken from a YouTube video called Heroes of Color, Gaspar Yanga. So the text in the middle is directly from that video. Field Notes. As soon as I arrive in Mexico City, I am asked how long I have been growing my dreadlocks. My hair, twisted up Havana style, says nothing. I panic, mumble a while, and avoid eye contact. Known as the first liberator of the Americas, Gaspar Yanga led one of the most successful slave rebellions in the Americas. Yanga was among the many slaves brought over from West Africa and forced into working the Spanish sugar plantations in Mexico. My host mom is a wealthy white Mexicana. She asks if she can take my picture because her children are hippies. Later, I tell her, mi papá es Afroamericano. She has never heard the word before. Should have said mayate. Around 1570, he led a slave revolt and escaped with a group of followers into the mountainous terrain surrounding Veracruz. There, Yanga and his people formed a settlement, which grew to some 550 people and eluded capture for nearly 30 years. My classmate says aloud, I didn't even know Afro-Mexicanos existed. Our professor nods, supportive. The white-skinned girls in my class complain about being called güera, It's offensive to be named. Yanga and his people waged a campaign against Spanish colonial rule, raiding caravans that ran between Veracruz and Mexico City, carrying goods, foods, and other supplies. At the supermarket, I am asked, "Es tu cabello?" for the first time in my grandparents' country. Welcome home. I've started counting the number of times I am mistaken for someone from another Latin American country. Yanga's raids and the ongoing exodus of Black and Indigenous slaves to his community upset the Spanish plantation owners. The owners called on the colonial government to take action. The vendor at the pyramids wants to know if I'm from Costa Rica. No, I'm your Black neighbor. Run. My professor, Wera, compares being called Wera to being called nigger, and I am the only one to correct her. In 1609, the Spanish governor sent a military force of 500 men to put an end to Yanga and his group. Opposing that force was Yanga's irregular army, armed with firearms, machetes, bows and arrows, and even stones. The exhibit on racism al Museo de la Ciudad de Mexico mentioned Black people 3 times. The clerk at the gas station stared at my face, curious. He leaned across the counter and asked, "Es mexicana?" When Yanga learned of the impending attack, he sent one of his Spanish prisoners to negotiate peace terms. The Spanish, however, had no interest in negotiation, and a brutal battle quickly ensued. My host mom says, "En Mexico no hay Black people." I point to myself, but she never looks me in the eye. "Es tu cabello real? Tienes mucho. Qué increíble. ¿Son rastas o trenzas? ¿De dónde es? Es de África." Both sides suffered heavy casualties, but the Spanish governor was forced to respect Yanga's strength. Yanga and his survivors retreated higher up into the mountains, out of Spanish reach, and again flourished. I video chat with my best friend. She asks about being Black in Mexico, and when I cry, she does too. Every morning, I listen to Chance the Rapper's coloring book, hum to myself, we know, we got it. After many failed negotiations and military actions, the Spanish opted to negotiate in 1618. Under a treaty, Spain granted freedom to Yanga and his followers in exchange for an end to raids on Spanish caravans. One of my classmates from Oaxaca teaches me a phrase that means, "I don't have to answer that." Sometimes I cannot tell if people switch to English because I'm American or because they're racist. In addition, the former slaves were given land, and Yanga and his family were recognized as rulers of the community. By 1630, the town of San Lorenzo de los Negros was born, the first free African settlement in the Americas. Sometimes I forget how to say, "How much does it cost?" Wait while the vendor looks at me, blank. I went to the aquario and a pufferfish drifted toward me, stared joyously until I left. In 1932, the town was renamed Yanga to honor the courageous man who represented hope and liberty to so many enslaved people. I learned about Yanga during my final week in Mexico. Alone, finally, with my kin, can't help but weep. I can't find an image of Yanga online. Instead, I try harder to love my own face, nose, lips, hair. I press my palm to the screen, then to my heart. Promise to look for him everywhere, even in the quiet. I have a series of Yanga poems in the manuscript, so I'm going to share, I think, 2 more and then just see where we're at with time. This poem is called "Why I Want to Know What Yanga Looked Like." If I had a photograph of Yanga, if one arrived in the mail from a friendly but weary postman, in a long, thick envelope sealed with spit that was spat between the gap and 2 clean teeth, because I think of Yanga as having a gap between his teeth. Not sure why, it just seems like it makes sense. Not a humongous gap, but a small one, a thin space between 2 yellow bones at the front of his mouth, the crack in a bell that makes the song sweeter. And when I speak about songs, I am always speaking about freedom. A gap like that, where everything goes black for a minute and then the lights come on. And somehow what you are seeing is more beautiful because of the interruption becomes part of the thing itself. And suddenly you can't imagine the two teeth, wide and high at the top of the mouth like sails, having ever existed without a dark spell in between them, marker of an absence, skinny black pillar, little room holding everything I have lost since Yanga's escape, since the sieges on land and by foot, the opened door to 4 centuries of running and a fistful of secret languages I only speak in my dreams. If I looked at the photograph of Yanga and found all that, a litany of things thieved from my contemporary memory, and Yanga had sealed the envelope with spit and a lick of aloe vera, then I'd frame the photograph and hang it in the center of my home. So every time I left, before locking the door, I'd check for Yanga, grinning at me with a gaze 4 centuries long, black streak in his smile, the 2 large teeth shining like sugar. This is my last Yanga poem, and it's a letter to him. Yanga, did you really agree to turn in runaways in exchange for freedom? Your people's freedom? Were you a patriarch? I have no room to judge, no experience to understand yours exactly. I still love you. I just want to know. Did you have children? A wife? A husband? A gender? Or a few? In my knowledge of you, what has been imposed, invented? Yanga, I have been thinking about birth. Who was your mother? How many people loved and raised you? What did you call yourself? Was it you that birthed the people, or your wife? Were you a man, or something freer? I have been thinking about birth as the place we begin, but I want to begin with you. I think I do. What language did you speak? Who taught it to you? Did you like chocolate with hot peppers like Kinsey Duncan said? Or the way loving someone means you will always remember them, even if you forget their face? Teach me to be a person without a nation on the other side of enslavement. I will write to you always. Someone we cannot picture is writing to us now, asking for assistance. They are on the brink of an escape neither you nor I could see. They are ours in the way we are each other's, in the way you were your people's, and they are bringing all of us with them into the forever universe where we are always free. I stopped saying I could never have imagined, because when I met you, it stopped being true. That's my last poem. Thank you.
Oh, Ariana, that was so beautiful. These Yanga poems, I think they're my favorite thing right now. I think, growing up, I wasn't in Mexico for too long before I had to migrate, but it's like, I come from a Black village in Mexico. And I think that we all know that we're Black, right? Because it's like everybody tells us that we're negros or negras. And your Yanga poems, I just feel like if I had had something like that when I was in Mexico, it would have really changed everything for me. I remember when I moved to Mexico City and I was in grade school there, like I was the only Black person there, and it was always a question mark. And now that you're writing these poems, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait for Black kids in Mexico to just be like, oh my goodness, look at this. We have such a rich history. Yeah, so thank you for offering us that. And now we're like at the Q&A portion of this little event. And if anybody has questions, please add them to the Q&A or send them in the chat, and we will be more than happy to answer some of your questions. But for now, Ariana, is there any questions that you might have or anything like that?
Thank you, Alán. I feel like I'm still like recovering a little bit. But I am curious because I feel like you and I have done a few events together, and I'm always curious to hear how artists plan their set list. So like, how did you decide what poems you wanted to read today?
Absolutely. I think that most of my poems are about undocumented migration, and my work tries to link together undocumented migration, the slave trade, and settler colonialism. And I think that while my work does that, I am so tired. I'm so tired of having that conversation over and over and over again, because it feels that every time I have the conversation, for people, they assume that it's like new, but it's like, no, this is literally the foundation of why like mestizos in Latin America have like the upper hand over Black folk, Indigenous folk, or Asian diasporic folk in Latin America. And I think that what I'm really invested in right now is how can I think more about intimacy? And I just want, like, when I was thinking about today's list, I was like, yeah, I really want to think about intimacy, and I really want to think about a grammar that allows me to envision a future outside of like people in detention centers right now, or Black folk like floating on the Mediterranean Sea as they're migrating from North Africa to Spain. Yeah, so I just wanted to be like, okay, let me try to be as intimate as I can and center an alternative future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, you and I have talked before about like, especially the feeling of like being invited to like quote unquote like Latinx spaces, right? Where you're kind of invited to speak about anti-Blackness, but that's an exhausting conversation to always be having, you know? And also, I mentioned earlier that your work makes me think about just the fullness of life, right? And that how is there space to talk about the fullness of life if people are always asking you to speak about one thing in particular? Your life, like your work, is full of so much because you have a whole life, you know, that is related to those things, but is not encapsulated only in those things. So yeah, thank you for offering that.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. There's a question that came in from Tanya Calvin. The question says, thank you so much, Alán and Ariana. Always a pleasure and honor to share space with you, even if virtual. How do you incorporate messages from your ancestors in your poetry?
Oh, hi, Tanya. I'm glad you're here. Yeah, I think for me, sometimes I have to decide what part of the message I'm going to share with others, you know, because some messages from your ancestors are only for you. Um, you know what I mean? And sometimes even if there's a thing that you want to share, it doesn't always mean that the person on the receiving end knows how to hold that, or knows how to give honor to it or respect to it in the way that you do. So I think for me, I have to decide first what feels appropriate and safe to share with others. And then from there, I can kind of talk about what it means to me, you know? Yeah, and I think too, I've spoken with Alán about this in writing like these Yanga poems that are in the manuscript that I've been working on. I wanted to be very clear that I was not trying to resurrect a formerly enslaved African person to continue to do work in my manuscript. So I also had to ask myself, how am I caring for Yanga? What am I? You can't invoke something or somebody without offering something in return. So I also had to have my own practices for how I am caring for Yanga's spirit, who is tired. You know, I imagine that he is tired. Yeah, so those were all things that I kept in mind. Alán, did you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think that for me, I think I started to write about with my ancestors, more aware when I was writing To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement. which kind of talks about the passing of my grandmother. And I don't have any really memories of my grandmother because I didn't grow up with the paternal side of my family. And what I started to do was I started to just, in the creation of the manuscript, I was like, I wonder like what my grandmother must have been like. And instead of writing about her or to her, I wrote about her mother. I have a poem in To Love and Warn and Displacement, which is about me building an altar, not for my grandmother, but for her mother and her great grandmother. So I think that just imagining relationships that I have no context of, but insisting that those relationships existed is super powerful. I also, in my collection, Intergalactic Travels, one of the things that I had to negotiate was my sister. I had a sister who like was about 1.5 years younger than me, who passed. And in that manuscript, whenever I wrote like poems about my mother, the first manuscript always said our mother, because I imagined myself writing this book with my sister. And then I was like, okay, let me just kind of like, there's no memories in my mind of my sister. Like my mother is like, I will never forget what she looks like, but I'm just like, I don't know what she looks like, right? So it's like, one of the things I had to do was like, okay, how do I not insist that these experiences with my mother were ours when they weren't, but also how do I like still maintain her in the manuscript? And I did maintain her in the manuscript in many ways, but those ways are like very private, and I like reserve my right to opacity, my right for people not to know.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer, Alán. I'm looking at I think we got a few more questions in here. Is it possible to buy the collection of Yanga poems? And if so, how, where? That's funny. So the manuscript that I've been saying I've been working on this for so long. It's not officially announced yet, so I can't say a lot about it. But later this year, you should be able to. So if you just keep an eye on my website, my social media, they'll be out in the world soon, for sure.
Okay, I'll read a question for you, Ariana, from Rocio Mota. Hi, Ariana, can you share more about the journey of being in Mexico and finding out about Yanga? Super grateful to now know about them now through you. Was it like uncovering history that isn't widely known even within Mexico?
Yeah. Hi, Rocio. Thank you for that question. Yeah, I mean, I've been to Mexico before as a child because I grew up on the south side of San Antonio, which is like it's like a 3-hour drive to the Piedras Negras from there. And so we had gone to the day market a few times before when I was growing up, but I had never been to Mexico as an adult, and I had never been past like the border cities. And so when I went, I was the only Black person in my group. I was the only Black person I saw for almost 6 weeks. For the most part, every now and then I would see a person, another Black person, and we would always talk. I was asked a lot of questions about my hair because I had Havana twists at the time, and people wanted to know what the style was called and also like how to get it done. And I like had no vocabulary for talking about Black hair, so I was fumbling a lot. But yeah, being in Mexico City specifically, because that's where I was for the whole 6 weeks for the most part, it was really lonely. It was really, really lonely. And I think it also like reminded me of growing up on the south side of San Antonio because that experience. The experiences mirrored each other. Okay, there are a lot of similarities between that, and I think because at the same time I was also experiencing anti-Blackness, and I was being racialized in ways that the rest of the people I was with were not. And I could clearly see it happening. And that was a really difficult thing to contend with. And also just know how to navigate, right? I feel very experienced in navigating situations like that in English. But there were certain things that I just didn't know how to say off the top of my head, as a defense thing in Spanish. And so I felt very guarded and on edge all the time. I would be having a pleasant interaction with somebody somewhere, and then suddenly something would shift in the conversation. They would understand that I was Black, right? But they wouldn't know how to ask it. And it always had to be vocalized for them. They always had to make mention of it. And so it was very strange for me. And it wasn't until the last week that I was in Mexico City. I was at a coffee shop working on a paper for my class. And a friend of mine, the person in the poem who taught me the phrase that means I don't have to answer that, she found this YouTube video it was like 3 minutes long. It's an animated video that tells this story of Gaspar Yanga. It says everything that's in the middle column of that poem that I shared. And I had never known this before. I had not come across this in any of my research, and I was writing about histories of Black people in Mexico for my project. I had never come across this. I'd never seen it in any literature. I have a degree in Mexican American Studies, and it never mentioned ever. And so it just floored me, and I think it was important for me because it also let me know that I am not the first person. I'm not the first Black person to walk through these spaces, to be in these spaces, right? Mexico City was a huge destination during the transatlantic slave trade. At one point in colonial history, right, there were more enslaved Africans in Mexico City than there were Spaniards. So I think receiving that history felt, I don't know if it felt like an affirmation, but it just let me know that I wasn't alone. And I knew that even though my life experiences are different from Yanga's, that we are tied to each other, that we exist in relation to each other, and I need to be constantly exploring that relationship. Yeah. We have another question, Alán. Do you want to take that one?
From JR. So JR writes, thank you both for your readings and responses to the questions thus far. Going off of Tanya's question, I am wondering how you understand the place of grief in your work and your processes, the ways griefs can show up in your body while writing, and the way poems and or collections can hold grief. Thank you. I think that grief is a huge part of my work. I think that growing up, like, I used to see my family members crying all the time. It wasn't something that we kind of like drifted from. And grief was something that we did quietly, but also communally. And as the years went by, the longer we spent in the US, the less I ever saw family members allow anybody else to witness them crying. And I think that for me, poetry, in the absence of family members who are consenting to witness me cry in front of them, or who do not want to cry in front of me, I think that poetry has become a place where I can just cry. I write a lot when I'm in grief, and I also write a lot to document the violences that are happening in the world. To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement. A lot of the poems in this collection are about events that have happened. One of the poems is about Alma Minerva Chacon, who was an undocumented woman who was forced to give birth while shackled to a hospital bed. And I write in response to her, with her. And another poem is about Carmela Parral Santos, who is an Afro-Indigenous, who was an Afro-Indigenous mayor in a Afro-Mexican municipality in Oaxaca, who was murdered by the state because of her commitment to Indigenous pueblos in Oaxaca. And I think that for me, Edward Stantica, who is a Haitian writer, her work has really taught me that in certain countries, artists are the first to be killed by the state because they are the ones that are allowing everybody else to continue to push on imagination. And in the US, even though artists are not targeted in the same way as they are in the Americas, I do feel a political responsibility to create art because in my country of birth, those who are creating art are being disappeared. So for me, the stakes are really high in writing.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Alán, for that. I also think I've spoken about this before, but I feel like reading To Love and More in the Age of Displacement taught me how to make space for my own grief as well. And I think to not be afraid of it. Yeah, especially in moments when I'm experiencing a lot of grief, you know, and want to feel differently, you know, but just being able to make space for the grief, to not avoid it. I think that's really difficult to do. Yeah. In terms of, we do have another question for you, Alán. I feel like I've been answering a lot of questions. So would you be down to answer the next one? It's from Tatiana Flores saying, thank you to us both. They're struck by my experiences in Mexico City and wanted to ask Alán if you have had the opportunity to travel to Mexico as an adult.
Yeah, so after I was able to adjust my status and receive a green card, and I have been able to travel back home. And being in Mexico, I'm from Oaxaca, and I've traveled back to both Mexico City and Oaxaca. Mexico City is where my mother's house is at, and Oaxaca is where my grandmother's home is at. And in Mexico City, it's just, oh, and I've also been to Tijuana a few times, but Mexico City is just a weird place. In Mexico City, I just remember like always being harassed because the assumption about me is that I'm Colombian in Mexico. Everywhere I went, like I would hear like racial slurs, but particularly about Colombia in Mexico City. And then in Oaxaca, it's different because when I went back to Oaxaca, I had like, obviously I had like my layover was in Mexico City because there's no direct flight from Oaxaca. But the first time I went, when I went to Oaxaca on my layover in Mexico City, they were so confused why I had a Mexican passport. They thought that like my parents were, the person in the airport thought my parents were tourists and that they had me in Mexico City, but that I was from somewhere else. And I was like, no, I'm from Oaxaca. I'm going to Oaxaca, like I'm just stopping by Mexico City. But when I landed in Oaxaca, I don't think I ever experienced a single moment of racial aggression in Oaxaca. In fact, I remember I was standing at a bank in Oaxaca trying to like exchange money, and this lady comes to me and she was like, I'll just say it in English. We were talking in Spanish, but she was like asking me if I knew the dances of the Guelaguetza, and I was like, yes. And then she's like, okay, are you available on these dates? Because we need 50% Black people to be part of the baile, because if we don't have 50% Black people, we can't do it. And I was like, I don't live here anymore. I was like, I'm not available those dates. But like her approaching me in this bank to like be part of this dance, right? For like the festival, it was just like, in Mexico City, that would never happen. But in Oaxaca, they were like, oh yeah, we don't have enough like Black people in our thing, and it needs to be 50% Black, 50% Indigenous. And I was like, okay, cool. But when I traveled to the village where my mother is from, so my mother and my grandmother are from, they grew up in their ancestral villages. I did not. I grew up in a village that my grandmother was pushed out of Zapotec territory, and she migrated to Mixtec territory. And when I visit my mother's village and my grandmother's village, I am the lightest person there outside of my grandmother. Like everybody is dark-skinned Black. And in there was the moment where they had questions about me. They were like, we know that you're Black, but do you have like a non-Black parent? And it was really interesting to navigate those politics. Like, no, both my parents are light-skinned Black. And it was hard because in that village, it was just like everybody's dark skin. And I think that the idea of finding somebody light skinned attractive was just so foreign. And it really gave me a different idea of like, oh my goodness, there is a deep love for dark skinned people here that I don't think I've ever been in a space in my entire life where I've seen dark skinned Black people valued and respected in the way that they are valued and respected in my mother and grandmother's ancestral village. How are you feeling, Ariana?
I feel very full right now. I mean, we got to hear poems. I felt like that was, thank you everybody for those really thoughtful questions. I really enjoyed, yeah, I thought this was really wonderful. How are you feeling, Alán?
I feel good. I was nervous. I was nervous about today, but I'm really happy that it happened. I think that when I'm in Latin American spaces, I'm always like, I don't want the conversation to be like, oh, Black people exist in Latin America, because it's like, we have the largest population of Black people, so that should never be the start of the conversation. So I'm happy that like that was not the case, and that we got to really center our work and be with one another. So thank you, everybody, for like joining today, and thank you to the Museum of Latin American Art.
Thank you so much to you both for sharing your powerful word and your experiences with us. You had me crying at the very first poem, I'm not gonna lie. But we are so happy that you were able to join us for today's program. I would like to thank Ariana and Alán for a wonderful presentation. Please check out the MOLA website for more programming related to our festival. And we hope to see you again soon. Enjoy your day. Thank you.